the very first time we recorded anything on For the Many Mondays, it was all about Brexit. And I asked a very good friend of ours who was stuck in France and has been stuck in France ever since, to actually tell us about Brexit. And it's the third time that Rachel has come to talk to us. She's not going to talk to us about Europe or Brexit. I did hear her actually talk about feminism at an actual meeting which I attended. I think it was a branch meeting. But actually today what she's going to talk about is, and I've forgotten the title. You're going to have to tell it to me, Rachel. All right, I'm going to hand over straight over to you. And if you can actually give me the title, I'd be terribly delighted. Rachel, all yours.
Thank you. I think we agreed I was going to talk about sex discrimination and its effect on women and also on men. That was it, wasn't it? It's interesting to see that we have a very sex mixed participation this evening. I thought there'd be majority women, but that's not the case. Okay, well, I want to start by reminding us all of the difference between sex and gender. And I'm also going to put down a marker that this is disputed, but this is what I think. 49.6% of the world, or thereabouts, is classified as female at the present time, on the basis that 49.6% of the population are born with the equipment for bearing children, and the others are not. They're born with the equipment for making children. There is a tiny, tiny number of people who have neither, and a tiny, tiny number of people who have both sets of sex organs, but they really are rare and very special. And when we talk about biological sex, we're talking about some of the physical differences between men and women that to some degree determine our life chances as we go through our lives. But they don't completely determine them. But it lays, if you like, the foundation for what is then built on the top of that difference. And this is what's known as gender. So sex is regarded by most people who discuss this as what you're born with. I'm going to shelve the trans issue here, but clearly some people are unhappy with the assigned sex at birth and are uncomfortable and unhappy within it and wish and campaign and have the right to change that. I'm just going to park that. I don't really want that to be the subject of tonight, but let's park it and acknowledge that it's the case. But for most of us, we would regard the difference between sex and gender as the difference between the equipment that you're born with and the way in which we, society in which we grow determines how we should be a man or how we should be a woman, how we should be a boy or how we should be a girl. We don't come born with that, but we grow up with ways of being a man or a woman, a girl or a boy, and that is gender. So if you like, the gender builds on the sex with which we come into the world. And that's quite important because there are lots of consequences. And if you think about the men and women who we become and the life chances that result to us as a consequence of being regarded as man or regarded as woman, you see the way in which the two things work together, sex and gender, to form the basis of discrimination. Because you can only discriminate against something if you know what it is. So we have to know in some degree, what is it? How do we understand what it is to be a woman? How do we understand what it is to be a man, on top of just the very simple issues of the equipment that we come into life with? I'm going to look at three aspects of the way in which discrimination is built into capitalist systems by looking at maternity, what happens to what are the consequences of the fact that nearly half the population can bear children, and of those many do, and quite a large number don't. And that only occupies a part of the life of those women as well. There's a lot more to their life as well. So maternity is quite important. The second is job segregation, the ways in which we decide as a society, we, they, we'll talk about that later, which jobs are suitable for women and which jobs are suitable for men. And built onto that, how much you should be paid if you're doing a man's job or if you're doing a woman's job. And that is the sort of discrimination that is gendered. It's built not only on the sex we're born with, but with our understanding of how we are as men and how we are as women. And the third issue I'm going to look at is, how does this stuff get decided? So what is the attitudes that we walk around with, all of us? Who makes the rules? Who makes the decisions about the right way to be a woman, the right way to be a man, what you ought to do, how you should behave, what's wrong for you? Women shouldn't get drunk, it's okay if men do. We don't like seeing girls tottering around, pissed out of their skulls, but it's okay for the guys. How short should our skirts be? Is it anybody's job to comment on them? Why don't we comment on how long are men's trousers? We don't. Where do these attitudes come from? To what degree do they determine our chances? How does that help in the construction of discrimination? And who are the power holders? And I'm going to just touch on the use of the word patriarchy to describe a bit about how male power still gets to determine quite a lot of these ideas about how we should be in our lives. So starting with maternity. Given that only with people with wombs get to make children, get to produce children, although the people without wombs have something to do with it, what do we then do with those children? How do we look after them? Who looks after them? How do we look after them? How do we decide who's going to look after them? And how do we decide and what happens when the woman who's busy having a child leaves the workplace for a period? In Western societies, almost nobody works all the way through pregnancy, childbirth, and immediately afterwards, partly because we on the left, socialists or social democrats, have campaigned for maternity leave and seen it as important and necessary. And I would have been part of those campaigns and still believe that it is absolutely necessary that it should be possible for people to leave their jobs and have their wages protected, preferably at a much higher level than they currently are, during the period when really you're not you've got other things to do than make money for the boss. After the birth of your child, how is it decided how that child is then cared for? And for a moment, we're going to look at it being cared for within some sort of family circumstances, although that is not the case for everybody. So often it's the mum that stays home to look after the children rather than the dad. Partly because of social attitudes that say, well, you know, women are so much more motherly, maternal, so much better caregivers. Is that true? Are all women better caregivers than all men? I know quite a lot of men of our age group, my age group, who bitterly regret now the fact that they were able to spend so little time with their children and are deeply enjoying the amount of time they can spend with their grandchildren. Those men lost out. They were busy making money, they were busy earning a living. And my age group, most families were able to depend on one wage into the family, and it was usually the man's, because it was usually a better wage. And quite often, even now, that's how we decide who is going to raise the children and who is going to earn some cash. In general, men's pay is higher. Not always true. You can all think of exceptions immediately, and there are exceptions. But if you take the global division of labour, women in Britain and the West earn about 60% of the male wage on average, on gross average. So when you as a family are deciding who's going to be the breadwinner and who's going to be the child carer, it quite often comes down to who can make most dosh, and that is almost always the man. And this curtails the choices for both partners. It's not a free choice as to who gets to look after the kids. It's determined a lot by who gets to earn some money and the most money. If you decide that both of you need to work, then you need to pay somebody else to look after your children. And we have an almost total absence now of state-funded childcare. My daughter-in-law gave up work with the second child because she was facing childcare bills 21 years ago of £1,000 a week for 2 children. Impossible, she couldn't earn that much. Being able to provide childcare in capitalism depends on paying the people who provide it less than the people who are buying those services. It depends on that. You can't pay them more than the people who are buying their services. It's economic nonsense. So long as it's a commercial relationship without any state intervention, then you are forcing the price of childcare to be below the price of the labour of those who produce the children. We've kind of stopped talking about collective childcare. Nurseries have become exorbitantly expensive, even though technically because they're privatised, basically. Many, many years ago, a lot of us campaigned for workplace nurseries. The idea you could go to work, drop your child in the workplace nursery, paid for by the employer, would you believe? This was a demand of the unions at the time, and I think technically still is. But nobody particularly expects it to happen at the present time, given the imbalance of power between employers and unions at the present time. But for many people, that looked like the way forward. You go to work, you put your child in a well-funded, well-paid employer nursery, you can pop in your lunch hour, you can go see your child, you're there to take her home or him home at the end of the day. It's a very viable solution. But employers don't want to pay. It's regarded now as a cost of employment, and we've got to keep the cost of employment down because we're in competition with the whole world, in particular China, and so on and so on. So there's a whole sort of economic nexus around the way that we do childcare, around how it's paid for, who pays for it, and the consequence of who then does the childcare. And that kind of leads me into the second topic that I wanted to look at, and that's what's called job segregation. The way in which work is divided into men's work and women's work, and clearly the care of children is very largely regarded as women's work and overwhelmingly done by women and overwhelmingly badly paid. So when there is a decision, I mean, we've all grown up with ideas about men's work and women's work, but I mean, sometimes they're quite hard to shake off. Plumbers are men, train drivers are men, lorry drivers are men, airline pilots are men, childcare workers are women, infant teachers can be women, heads of school are men. And actually that's often the case. But in our heads, we expect these people, when we think of a head teacher, many of us will see a man in our head while we're thinking about head teacher. When we're thinking about a nursery nurse, most of us will see a woman in our mind when we're talking about a nursery nurse. So we're looking at the way in which jobs are divided. It is slackening. One of my friends is training out here, is training as a firefighter, Michelle. She's just had an absolute struggle with the blokes down at Tool who wouldn't give her a badge for firefighting because A, she's Brit, 2, she's English, and 3, she's too smart for her own good, and 4, she's a girl. So this thing is still going on. Michelle's as good a her own mates are saying she's a really good firefighter, but when she goes to get her badge for the next level, the blokes are saying, not having girlies getting the badges. But in our lived lives, we've grown up with this degree of knowing what kind of people do what kind of jobs, and we regard it in many ways as normal until we stop saying it as normal. And again, this weighs more heavily on women because almost all the jobs described as women's work are lower paid. I'm finding it quite hard to think of jobs described as women's work which are more highly paid than jobs that are more regarded as men's work. There are women working in highly paid jobs. There are women merchant bankers. There are women engineers. There are women on the oil rigs. They're very few and far between, but they exist. But the vast majority of these well-paid jobs are regarded as men's jobs and are majority held by men. And the majority of jobs like cooking, and not chefing, of course, because that's blokes and it's better paid, but cooking for schools, for canteens, for everyday women's work, childcare, cleaning, catering and childcare, those are the three big lumps, and infant teaching would be the three big areas where you would expect to see a woman, and you would expect to see a low salary. Teaching assistants is becoming another one of these categories. Very few men get or take or are given jobs as teaching assistants. And this is not to say that there aren't women who you probably know who would make damn good engineers, and men who you probably know who would make damn good child carers. Not better than me, because I'm not good. I'm all right with adolescents, but I'm not brilliant with little ones. But a lot of blokes I know are really good with little kids. They like them, which I find slightly difficult personally, but they actually seem to rather like them and consequently very good with them. So having the labour market segregated in this way means that for many, many women, the majority of women, the kind of work they can expect to do, shop work's another one, the kind of work they can expect to do is going to be low paid, and there won't be a career ladder either. Because to get better paid, you need to get promoted into being the manager and then into the manager's manager and so on. But that doesn't happen because you get here and then your business school graduate guy comes in here. So none of these jobs like cleaner do you get to be the top of any heap that takes you into a higher paid bracket. And just to flip back for a moment to maternity leave, one of the other issues about maternity leave for women who are in jobs that do have some sort of career advancement is that while you're out looking after the kids, the guys with whom you were on the same level when you went out for childcare are quite correctly making their way up the greasy pole. When you come back at the level that you left, and you're 5 years behind in experience in greasy pole climbing. And you'll probably stay 5 years behind because how do you catch that up? And that's the effect of taking maternity leave, is if you're in that kind of job where there is a career ladder, you will come back into work afterwards at the level that you were at when you left, and the guys who didn't, and the women who didn't take maternity leave will have moved up a little or a lot. So when we're looking at the ways in which discrimination works within a capitalist system, we're looking at the effects of having children and looking after them, and the effects of jobs being gendered. A lot of the jobs that were divided by sex no longer are so. So a lot of the jobs that you might have said 40 years ago, a woman would struggle, the average woman would struggle to do it, like mining coal, or like driving a heavy goods vehicle before we invented power steering, or like metal bashing, but things that required male strength. And most of you are stronger than most of us, on average. You're just built that way. It's part of being a guy. That isn't to say that there aren't loads and loads of exceptions, but we're talking here about averages. Of course, there are some women who are stronger than many men, and of course, there are some men who are pretty feeble, and a lot of women who can beat them at anything. But that's not the issue, it's the average and the general. But many of these things are no longer the case. I went shopping the other day and saw a woman slightly bigger than me driving a 2-wagon articulated truck. Why not? But now you have power assist, you have, I mean, I couldn't reach the pedals 40, 50 years ago. But nowadays you've got seats that move up and down, you've got cabins that accommodate to you, you've got power steering, you've got all the gadgets in the world. Why not? So jobs that did once depend on male power in order to justify the reason why that job should be done by men, there are fewer and fewer of these jobs that require the muscle power that the average man is able to command and the average woman is not, but there's less and less of them. So if work is still gendered, and it is, you only have to look around you, don't you, to look at the truth of that statement. If work is still gendered, why is it still gendered? If it's now possible for women to not be held back by physical strength for most jobs, I'd say the vast majority, why aren't we seeing equal numbers of women in engineering, in road transport, in airline piloting? In being the boss, in being head teacher. So why are we still seeing a very, very gendered workforce? And then you have to look at the sort of third category of things I wanted to look at, attitudes, which I've been sort of weaving in as we went along. We've all grown up with ideas in our heads that are socially controlled, if you like, but socially defined. And they're not defined by what we're born with, but they're socially defined. They change. I grew up with the idea that a decent woman would never ever smoke in the street or eat in the street. Certainly would never swear. And if I did it when I was 30, I got a gasp from the blokes. So I often did it so I could get a gasp from the blokes and a bit of attention. But nowadays, it wouldn't have the same effect, so I don't do it so much. But a lot of the rules that governed the conduct of young women 40 years ago, my cousin had a shotgun marriage because she was pregnant at 16 and it was not done. She was still at grammar school. Sort of 5 years later, she had a shotgun divorce with 2 kids who've both grown up to be lovely men, my cousins. I'm very fond of them. These days, that's completely changed. It's not an issue. So, except we can sneer at women who have kids from 5 different fathers. You know, we can sort of sneer at people still. But how did that change? What made the change? Who controls the way, who controls the issues about what is regarded acceptable for men and what's regarded acceptable for women? So who's putting us in these pigeonholes? How are we getting put in these pigeonholes? What men ought to be and what women ought to be, and therefore what's the jobs we ought to do and who ought to look after the children, regardless of whether you're actually any good at it or whether you like doing it or not. And you have to say, I mean, that the scads of sort of feminist writings about the patriarchy, and there's a whole, there's even quite a lot of fairly interesting discussion about what matters more, class or sex. I mean, that's a bit of an academic discussion, but it's quite a real one, which I'm just going to say, well, both. The 2 major sections of society that face the most discrimination are women and working class, both. And I'm not going to put numbers on that. But how did it get this way? How did it stay this way? And who gets to make the majority of the decisions? And then we need to look at power. Who actually holds the power in the society in which we currently live? Who makes the rules? And what gender are they? What sex are they? I beg your pardon. And I think we then have to look at the cabinet, Eton, and the influence of circles of power like male-only private schools, male-only attendance until recently in certain colleges of Oxford and Cambridge. That's changed in the last 20 years. It's still uneven, but it was one of the campaigns to get change that has to some degree worked. The church, all of them, and the mosques, But all the religious establishments of the book have been historically, and mostly still are, controlled by the guys at the top. And I would argue that it is no accident in this case that over 2,000 years of these institutions, these powerful social institutions, being controlled by guys, the role of women within those institutions has been the role of handmaid, not the role of minister, preacher, not the role of controller, not the role of the person who makes the decisions about how we should be living as men and as women. These organizations within society, business, clubs, to some degree working men's clubs, but they have so much less power. Until very recently, politics. And I remember, and many of you do, how few women there were in Parliament 40 years ago. We knew the names of all of them because there were so few. That's changed. That's been another fight. It's still changing. We're now looking at widening out to look at the effect of race on power and the effect of transgender on power. And that needs doing, but it's not what I'm talking about tonight. I don't think it's any more or less important, but it's not what I'm talking about tonight. So when we're using, I'm going to use the word patriarchy very loosely, but you can see that there have been and still are social structures in which men are dominant, and there is a degree to which men benefit in general from that dominance in the same way that all of us benefit to this day from the slave trade. We weren't complicit in it, we didn't have any decision in it, and nor did our forebears, but all of our working class families were a little bit better off because of Britain's trade with the colonies. All our lives were a little bit better because Britain was a bit wealthier because of its trade with the colonies. We didn't make that happen, we didn't vote for it or speak for it, but it happens. And it's the same if you think about the patriarchy. The men in this circle didn't vote for the patriarchy, aren't part of it, but in some ways have probably through their working lives benefited from the ideas of male power and supremacy that includes. But I do not hold them responsible for the decisions taken by the power elites. But just to recognise that, you know, we do benefit from stuff that we didn't actually vote for or have any say in, or even the vote at the time that it happened. The working class didn't have the vote at the time of slavery. Things do change despite the power and influence. And I mean, I haven't even gone, the media. Would you like to name one powerful woman editor of a major newspaper? Because I'm scratching my head here. So if you look at all of these sort of influences, the major parts of society that influence and shape the way in which we look at the kind of jobs that are done, the way we look at how children are cared for and brought up, and the way we think about how things ought to be and how women ought to be and how men ought to be, you can see that we are still living in a society that is male dominated. But you can also see we're living in a society that's capable of change. These things are not fixed. We have changed them, they have been changing, and it's people like us that are there to make that change, that demand that things get better. We understand and know. I think all of us here would probably agree that we cannot have full equality within capitalism because capitalism is built on inequality. But nonetheless, we struggle and strive to get as close to forms of equality that we possibly can, in order that all of us, men and women, can be the people that we should be, rather than being the people that we're corralled into being, the people that we're boxed into being, but to be the people that we could be. And I don't think that we could all do everything, but I do think that all of us have probably got undiscovered bits that maybe we would have enjoyed spending a bit more time with in the course of time. I think that's all I want to say for now. I think that will do. Half an hour's enough. And anyway, you're all zoomed out.
Thank you, Rachel. Actually, we gained a few people while you were talking, so the message must have got out. So I'm going to say hello to Butternut and also to Andy, who have joined. Now, what I want to do now, if it's all right with yourself, is if anybody's got any questions, and what I'd like them to do is to use their little hand and put their little hand up, because no one's put their little hand up at the moment. So I will ask a question, if it's all right with yourself. When feminism came into being with people like Germaine Greer and the female unit, the book The Female Unit, did that help or hinder the women's movement, in your opinion?
That was probably the third wave of feminism. I think it helped because it brought a debate. It brought it into public discussion. A lot of people hated her, and I'm still a little unsure about what I think about it, but I do think the book was important. I don't agree with everything that's in it. I can't remember it so long ago since I've read it. And for that, it's mattered. On the other hand, it's taken attention away from working class women writers, and also perhaps from the people who came before Mary Wollstonecraft would be just one, but a whole line of women who were fighting for women's equality quite a long time before. But yes, I think she mattered. I think she's gone a bit off since, but yes, that book made people really talk about women's equality.
I've got a couple of questions. A couple of people are brave enough to ask a question. We'll go to Lynn first. Lynn.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I love your logic of your talk, the way you sort of built up your arguments and stuck to your list, which often, I tend to deviate. So that I was very impressed by that. How can we change expectations amongst females? They do tend to go for lower paid occupations and have lower expectations and lower aspirations. Can you think of any ways that could be improved?
I think that for many, particularly working class women, a job isn't a career. It's a way to make money and stay alive, and to feed your family. And for that, any job that pays you enough will do. And I think that's a way in which many people live their lives in our country. It might be limited, but it's the way a lot of us live, taking whatever job we can get to feed the family. And often a job for women that will fit around childcare, and they're not easy to get. So cleaning, catering. So that's one of the determinants, I think. And also, we are all influenced by the culture in which we live. We may be hoping for something better, but we're not outside of capitalism, and we're not outside of gendered thinking. It's in our heads as well. We have to fight against it all the time ourselves. Well, not all the time, because that would be tedious. We have a bit of time off from time to time. But I find myself thinking grumpy thoughts about other women from time to time, and then I have to tell myself, well, she probably couldn't help it. I think that for more demanding, more interesting jobs to be open to those women who are able to accept them and don't just need to take a job that works around childcare, we need to think about childcare, because that's one of the real constraints, isn't it, of what sort of jobs you can take. So I think we need to look at the structure of employment, to look at the ways, the hours of work. A lot of women work in supermarkets because that will fit around with a man's job. So one of them can work 9 till 5 on a man's job, and the other one works 6 till 9 in the evening. They have an hour together for tea, and then she goes out and does her bit. while he looks after the kids because you can't afford the childcare. So there's a lot about how society is constructed, I think, that forces choices and forces, if you like, lower expectations. If you could offer those women better jobs, they might bite your fingers off, but they're not there for them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn, for that question. Come to Vicky. Hello, Vicky.
Hi, thank you so much, Rachel. I learned a lot, and as always, it's so clear the way you explain things. It's really, really good. Thank you. I just wanted to come back on a couple of things and maybe clarify and explore a bit more. So I think that the cornerstone does seem to be the fact that women are the child bearers, and a lot of things flow from that, both culturally in every way. But something that you said was that who looks after the children? And that question is determined by who earns the most. And so that on average, you're saying that it's the men that earn the most. That means the women are then bringing up the child. Now, I think things have moved on so much because the way things have developed recently is both parents need to work in order to keep themselves and their family. The house cost of housing has gone up so much that it's impossible for one person on average wage to pay a mortgage, for example, in the way that you could like 40 years ago. So what I found, and it's anecdotally, and I think people have all have confirmed this as well, is the carers have become the grandparents who are unpaid, and they are bringing up the next generation. It was amazing at school when it's as I was at primary school, when it's time for pickup, that it was mainly, and this was a terrible thing to observe, I thought really, that it was the grandparents who were picking them up, which has implications for grandparents. I mean, they might be delighted to have that role, but they may have felt that they'd served their time and this was their time now. But whatever. So it seems like the whole society, well, when I say society, these unnamed people that make the rules are deciding that it's a grandparent's duty to have a role in childcare now. I wondered whether you had any comments to make on that. So if we're wanting women to have choice, because of course some women might want to be the main carer of the children, but if we want women to have choice and to have a fair crack of the whip for all jobs, then we have to address the question of providing support at the time when children are very young. And what happens in employment, even though we have the most intricate, complicated legislation, is when a woman of certain childbearing age goes for a job, there's an unwritten kind of hurdle that she has to overcome to be selected for a job, in that she might go off and take maternity leave, whereas a male, although he might leave for other reasons, may not, and there's still that prejudice to overcome. And I was wondering if, as a way of overcoming that, if we shouldn't campaign for both men and women to have, not a choice thing, but to have the same leave once a child is born. Because even when it's left to choice, when they have this idea of sharing it, it ends up that the woman is mainly taking the share. But so, in other words, you need to present to a prospective employer a person who's a man or a woman who's going to be liable to take off the same amount of time. I was just wondering whether that would be a possibility, and it would also go to address men feeling later on that they wish they'd had more time with their children, and shift the social expectation that it's women who are automatically going to be the main carers. And of course, for women of childbearing age who are on a career path is going to be interrupted due to childbearing, it happens at the worst time in the career ladder time scale, if you like, because all that time of investing in education, training, the time when you should be capitalising on experiences and things like that coincides with childbearing age. So when you come back to work, you're going to be facing that deficit, and it's so hard to make up. So if we want women in high echelons, then we're going to have to address it with proper and more imaginative ways of supporting women. Bringing about change. I don't know whether people have had a chance to have a look at Netflix. There's a program we saw on Peter Tatchell's life documentary, and that is so fantastic. And I think that the gay people who fought for change have had dramatic results, so that in their lifetime, my cousin, for example, explained he never thought there would be gay marriage. He fought for it. He was on the streets for it, and he's lived to see it. And I think the determination and the imaginative ways in which they fought for different things, and that's got lessons for us. I think we need to study that period, see the things they did to shift those changes that were so entrenched. But there's always the fear that it might go back, so we have to keep vigilant once changes are made. But I would really recommend watching that. So perhaps we could give some more thought to what improvements should be made around the maternity leave question. That was it. Thank you.
I think that's spot on, and I think that that's the reason why so many women have been campaigned for the paternity leave that we currently have, for exactly these reasons. That I mean, I'm not confident that we would succeed in equalising maternity and paternity leave, but certainly that would, to some extent, equalise the interview situation as to who's going to take time off work. The other thing I think we have to is to look back against this business of the costs of employment, because you have employers looking at maternity leave and trade union organisation and time off for trade union duties and everything like this as a cost to business, rather than any sort of advantage that the business could possibly accrue. You might argue, and I might argue, that a business that looks after its employees well, that gives them good maternity leave, that welcomes them back, that retrains them when they come back, gains a really valuable and long-serving employee. You might argue that that's good for business. But at the moment, the business mindset is that it's got to reduce all the possible costs. So in order to, if you're going to address that mindset, then yes, I think we go on campaigning for better paternity leave and for pushing that as far as we can and keeping on pushing it. All of us here on this Zoom, you are all involved in changing society's attitudes. You probably do it every day, just in the way you are and the way you go out and things you do and the way you talk to people. And that though small changes, but we're almost all of us involved in doing stuff like that, possibly even this evening. You're absolutely right that I missed the grandparents, and I'm going to rethink that one. I told you it's very hard putting your hands up and saying I was wrong, but I missed the grandparents, and you're absolutely right. The unpaid labour of older citizens has become one of the sources of childcare because we can't afford the others because they're privatised. In my experience, some of the grandparents are having a great time and some of them are totally exhausted. And one that I know is utterly grumpy about it, but can't see a way out of it. Can't see how the family will actually survive without that unpaid labour. but is sacrificing in many ways his retirement to the needs of his family. So that's one we need to think. I need to think about some more. Thank you. Did I cover your points?
Thank you for that question, Vicky. Sally.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are. I can hear you.
I am an exhausted grandparent, and that's why you can't see me.
Oh.
This morning I was in Oxfordshire with my grandchildren, and I'm now back. Very much what Vicky was going to say, but the only about childcare, and I'd go back to things like wages for housework, not housewife. Whoa.
Yeah.
You see the old stereotypes, but I was interested seeing my son and daughter-in-law, who both work full-time, and the changes that COVID has brought, and whether you can be ever so slightly optimistic, because it's brought the question of the need for childcare forefront. Back to that, it seemed almost to be a woman's issue, and like, as you say, the rubbish jobs were the ones that would fit round picking up the kids from school, or you work part-time. But COVID and having kids off, having kids at home for a length of time, has brought the issue of childcare to everyone's attention. And also this flexibility of working from home for those who can, and not always going in. So I'm slightly optimistic that there might be changes coming out of COVID, and I wondered whether you'd considered those.
No, I haven't. It's too early to tell, I would say to that yes, one or two of my friends are school teachers, including one of my nieces, who's an infant teacher, who's had a tough time because she's had to work really hard preparing classes for the kids that aren't there, plus going in to look after the kids who are there. So she's actually found it really difficult, and has been increasingly pissed off at being regarded as a minder as opposed to a teacher. Because I mean, that's the way the right wing has tried to portray the issue, isn't it? Oh, the teachers aren't there to look after our children anymore. Teacher nodding in the middle of this. I don't know, Sally, whether these things will turn out to be permanent or temporary. I was involved in a big strike many years ago. I was on strike for 3 months, and that created huge friendships and solidarity between those of us who stood in the bloody snow for 3 months, and it did snow and it was cold. I was a social worker, and after the strike I thought, that's it, they're going to be wonderful militants forever. 3 months later they're all back to being social workers. Yeah, I'm getting a nod from Clive, who also has this experience. So I mean, actually underneath it all, there remains for many years through that generation an understanding of the need for solidarity that would come out from time to time when it arose. So it hadn't all got lost. So I really don't know what the pandemic's going to do. It's a very interesting question. I think, shall we wait and see?
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's very interesting.
Could be very interesting, yes. Right, we got two men who want to ask questions now. We got Paul first and then Clive. So Paul.
I get the impression that the Nordic countries are kind of maybe a bit further ahead in equality. And I wonder, is there anything we can learn from these countries? For example, maybe from Sweden, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, as a former international officer, the problem with learning from other countries is you can't transplant their entire system. And it's actually very difficult to transplant bits and pieces of somebody else's system into ours. So yes, you can look at the Scandinavian countries and you can see that by and large, they have social advantages that we don't have. They have paternity leave, they have maternity leave. I think in Sweden it's something like a year off with full pay. I'm wrong probably, but it's something like that. So that's really significant levels of social investment. However, they also pay 40% tax and above on their salary, which Brits currently pay 20 to 30% tax on salary. So in order to have the sort of things they've got, we've also got to change our heads around about how we're going to pay for it. And that, I think, we've got a way to go. So I think we can read up on what they've got and say, right, that inspires us. We're going to campaign to have that too. I think that's fine. But I think there are limits to how we can just sort of pick things out of another country and say, we can transplant that easily into ours, because it, in my experience, doesn't quite work like that. But do go and have a look and see what they've got and go and start saying, we could do with some of that, but how are we going to pay for it?
Don't encourage Paul to look at Sweden, because every topic we have on For the Many Mondays, Paul will ask a question and get the word Sweden in somewhere along the line. And I think it's a standing joke with him now, but no, I think it's a very good question. I do think they're a lot more advanced socially than we are, but there again, as you said, Rachel, you know, they do pay a hell of a lot more tax than we do to be able to afford the things which they've got socially. We come to Clive now, who was, were you in the snow at the same time Rachel was, Clive?
Yes, probably. Yeah, I mean, I really just wanted to follow up on something that Sally said, and the child care issue, and the opportunity that COVID gives us to maybe, you know, campaign a bit more on some of these sort of childcare issues, and the equality side of it. But the point I just wanted to comment on was that the reality is, surely, and I don't know whether anybody's done any study of it, but the majority of people who've been able to work from home are people in probably pretty well paid administrative type jobs. And the people who haven't been able to work from home and have therefore, in some cases, had their childcare needs made even more difficult because they may not be in a job that's been labelled as an essential worker. And their childcare needs have changed because of, you know, the fact that they happen to be in the lower paid jobs and they're not the ones who have been able to work from home. So it's just exaggerated their need for childcare even more.
It's pretty difficult to clean the office from home, and it's pretty difficult to serve somebody in a supermarket from home. You're absolutely right. There's a class divide between those who could work at home and those who couldn't. The jobs you can do from home, you can to some extent teach from home, but there are always the children of key workers as well. Yeah. So yes, it's thrown up a class divide in the way that childcare is done as well, isn't it? That,
yes, absolutely. And if the key worker, you know, if the person who works from home happens to be a single parent, you know, and they're juggling kids in one room with trying to do their job in another room as well. I mean, the whole thing's just been a mess. But that's a slightly off topic. But
well, no, it's the whole. It does throw up the whole sort of what kind of jobs we do, who does them, and who looks after the children issue very clearly, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I speak as somebody whose son is the single parent with 2 children and had to work from home, you know, and found it almost impossible. In fact, it stressed him out completely until the powers that be decided he was an essential worker, and then his kids were able to go back to school. But it was a completely arbitrary decision.
Right, yeah, cool. Rachel, can I ask you to put a light on, because you've gone...
Well, this is a bit embarrassing, but I'm going to go and have to fetch a man, because I tried to turn it on, only to discover that the man has done something to the electrics and I couldn't turn the light on. So I'm just going to go and shout for Mike to undo whatever he's done to the lights so that I can actually put the light on.
What? Yeah,
otherwise, I can dawdle on the floor for a quarter of an hour myself to find out what he's done. But I think a quicker way is to ask him.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's always a man's fault.
Right. You seem to unplug the lights in the Oh yeah.
We've got a couple of people who want to come back on. You know, we got Lynn and Vicky. Now, I don't know if we ought to allow them to ask another question, but I will make an exception for Lynn. So Lynn, if you've got another question.
Right, it was just a quick point really about Sweden for Paul. In Sweden, I don't think this is the case anymore, but the top rate of tax used to be 120%, which is a wonderful idea because obviously no one would have that income. So it's just a wonderful way of having a maximum salary. I suspect they don't do it anymore, but I just thought I'd throw in the Swedish point. Thank you.
And having lived in Sweden,
I was going to just say that, Sally.
having actually lived in Sweden, my husband got paternity leave back in 1973.
Yeah.
From Sweden, and they had, at the time, they had 98% tax. Not for my husband, but the top rate of tax was about 98%. But they have the culture of everybody being sort of fairly equal and not having tall poppy syndrome. So the tax is a leveler, or was.
Yeah,
I think still is.
I'm going to
still...
ban Sweden, I think, from now on. And any mention of Sweden on For the Many Mondays, I'm going to automatically just mute you. Vicky, you're not going to talk about Sweden, are you? I can't hear you.
Muted.
Vicky.
Muted.
You're muted.
I'm not going to mention Sweden.
Promise. Good.
Yeah. I was just going to ask whether we should perhaps take a really broad look at the whole topic, and that's the phrase that came into my head. I don't know if I've got this quite right, but it's something like, it takes a village to raise a child. Whereas what we're trying to do is shoehorn everything into either one or two parents having the sole responsibility for bringing up a child, and whether they do a good, bad or good enough job or whatever has such repercussions on the child and for society at large. So maybe we need to rethink actually how we've got into this anatomized way of families. And I remember reading something to do that Engels had written about the origins of private property, family in the state, where it's going back to class, where I think he seemed to be arguing that the society that we recognise today is all predicated upon on capitalism. So entangled in trying to loosen things and get an improvement in this, you're brought up against, well, we have to change the class system. So I'm wondering to what extent we have to not to sort of confine our discussion. I mean, I know it's blue sky thinking, but maybe we need to just rethink the way we bring up families and children.
When I was younger, I was very influenced by the Israeli system of kibbutz education. We tend to forget now that the foundation of Israel was, in many ways, a lot of socialists were involved in it and wanted to break out new ways of raising children and set up in the kibbutzim, the collective farms. Children were collectively cared for and lived mostly in dormitories and maybe didn't even sleep with their parents, depending on how strict they were. And a lot of years ago, that was a big discussion about collective rearing of children and the nuclear family. And I think you're absolutely right that we have been forced back into ideas of the nuclear family. Although perhaps, again, your point about the inclusion of grandparents has begun to open out a little bit, the cross-generational idea of family. But for more middle-class families in particular, the breakup of the economy since the 1970s has meant that middle-class families have been very mobile and don't necessarily have grandparents nearby. They may or they may not. working class families have begun to break up as well and have less family living nearby, to have less intensive networks of family and friends nearby. But for a lot of middle class families, their networks are very fragile because they've moved for work so often and are unrooted in their communities. And that's quite a large chunk of the population, not often doing very posh jobs, working for local authorities, teachers, going where the work is. So again, there are class differences about the degree to which we still have communal links and can look at the community as part of our endeavour of raising our children. But I think you're right, we've stopped thinking about it. There's so much on the telly about the nuclear family, isn't there? And it's, even though we accept the nuclear family looks a bit different from what it used to. But yes, I think we need to move out of that silo and think about ourselves as a, I mean, I don't actually have children of my body. I have a stepson and two grandchildren, which is a delight. Even if they are 6 foot tall and in their early 20s. And we don't see them very often because they live in Switzerland, but it was lovely. And it still is, actually. But we do need to perhaps think again about who is that for me, it'd be other people's children that pay my pension and wipe my bottom. It won't be mine because I haven't got any. Yeah. And we need to think about that, about whose children it is that we all pay for. And that's why we pay for them collectively. That's why we collectively pay for the education of everybody's children, whether we have any of our personal children at this present time or not. So if you hold that in your mind, then I think it argues against private education, private health, and so on, because we are collectively raising the next generation, even if we're not totally good at it at the present time. Because there's a lot of us for whom our children won't be looking after us, as was the old peasant way of doing it. It's not going to happen. It's going to be somebody else's kids.
Yeah. Right. No one else has got their hands up.
I have.
Oh,
again.
I've just seen.
This is more of a discussion than a question and answer. It is. It's great.
Come on, Sally.
Okay. 2 penneth worth. When I logged on right at the beginning, you appeared to be talking about Israel anyway. And just a confession to say that I worked on a kibbutz after my A-levels. I don't say that much now because I'm kind of embarrassed by it, but I went because of my interest in collective child rearing and the communist way, the socialist way. What I would say since then is I went to a kibbutz that had a children's house. So the children weren't raised with their parents. They were raised in the children's house. Now, looking back as a psychotherapist, I'm quite alarmed by that way of raising children. And I think it has parallels to the boarding school experience in that the children are uprooted from a particularly caring environment and can grow up possibly without a certain amount of empathy, which you see in the sort of ruling classes. Am I going too far?
Yeah.
Ali, I also did the kibbutz thing.
All right.
Before I went off to do my social work training. And I made friends with an Israeli who has the same name as me, was the same age as me. She'd done her military training, of course. So her life was quite different from mine, although she was much the same age, much the same height, which is fairly unusual, and had the same name. She's Rahel. And she, at the time, was very optimistic about the future of her country. She said that at that time, which were back in the early 70s, her country was run by concentration camp survivors. And that can only leave a mark. And a degree of paranoia, if you like. I mean, I don't really want to make psychological labels, but people who've been through that experience can only expect the worst. And she thought that when that generation died out, things would get better. She was very optimistic. She was wrong. Well, that's what I think anyway.
Yeah. I want to slightly lighten it now, if you don't mind. Because, I had an almost incredible upbringing, because I never saw a female from the age of 11 to about 18, because I went to an all boys secondary modern school and then an all boys grammar school. And so sex discrimination never reared its ugly head. And I had a sister and I had a mother, and I used to watch sport on television. And I remember Anne Packer and Mary Rand winning gold medals for Great Britain. And they were just the same as any man, because they'd done something absolutely wonderful, something I could never do. But the one thing I've found, using sport as an analogy in lots of ways, is that if anybody watched the football game yesterday, when England won, they would have seen a big difference in the actual programme, because the programme now is using a lot more women, not only as interviewers, but also as football pundits and experts. And that is a massive change of what has actually happened. We're not going back 20 years, 30 years, and whatever. That's what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. So the idea of equality, sex discrimination, and what have you, it's becoming less of a thing in particular jobs where women are equal to men, as you mentioned in your talk. And luckily, it is actually happening in television with presenters. Luckily, it's happening in the music industry with some wonderful female acts and what have you, which you never got in 1960, really. You just had male groups and male singers and male crooners. But now in 2000 and what have you, 2020, 21, we've actually got some wonderful female artists, which you never had before. So I think the time is changing, and hopefully very much for the better. I don't want you to answer that, Rachel.
I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for the day. I know that there's a female linesman in the Premier League now. I'm just waiting for the day she refs the match.
Yes, in fact, she has refereed a match, but not in the Premiership.
Well,
She's refereed a match in Division 2.
but it is a huge change, and
yes. And you're also
in
going to have a
in the
female
cycling
manager
world
soon.
these days, because the women cyclists, particularly the track cyclists, have been absolutely wonderful. A lot of blokes can actually name women cyclists. I think that's amazing, because when I started cycling, you went into a bike shop, and on one side of the shop there were shorts, and on the other side of the shop there were women's shorts.
The first cyclist I remember
maybe
was
3
Rachel
pairs. Yeah.
Anyway, that was once again. I know I can always call upon you, Rachel, and the talks you give are always thought-provoking, and you do a lot of work researching the talks as well, and for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And I think everyone will agree with me. For the last hour and 15 minutes, we've been royally entertained and also educated. Rachel, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Well, thanks to all of you who made such interesting contributions as well. That really helps.
It does help, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Even though 3 of them come on, how many times? 3 times?